Hey guys, tonight we slip high into the cool, thin air of the Andes, where the mountains rise like sleeping giants and the land itself has been shaped into endless stairways of green. You're standing on a narrow terrace, the stones still cold beneath your bare feet, the sky just beginning to soften from deep indigo into that pale, hesitant blue before sunrise. Somewhere below, a faint breeze brushes past rows of potato plants, carrying with it the earthy scent of damp soil and something quietly alive. It's peaceful, almost too peaceful, until you remember that up here, at this altitude, even breathing is a bit of a negotiation. You probably won't survive this. At least not without panting dramatically like you just ran a marathon after tying your shoes. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I always love seeing where in the world you're drifting off from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You draw in a careful breath, noticing how the air feels thinner than you'd like someone quietly turned down the oxygen dial while you weren't looking. The Andes don't ease you in gently. They expect you to adapt, and quickly. Around you, the terraces cascade down the mountainside in precise, deliberate steps, each one edged with stone walls that have stood for centuries. This isn't random farming. This is design. This is intention. This is survival carved into the bones of the earth. As the first sliver of sunlight spills over the peaks, the terraces begin to glow, each level catching the light at a slightly different moment, like a slow golden wave. You're not alone. A few figures are already moving quietly along the terraces. Farmers beginning their day before the sun fully commits to rising. There's no alarm clock here, no snooze button. The mountain decides when morning begins and you follow. You take a step forward, carefully balancing on the narrow path between terrace walls. The stones are smooth from generations of footsteps, worn down not by time alone, but by repetition, daily, quiet, persistent movement. That's the rhythm here. Nothing rushed, nothing wasted. A mainstream historical fact slips into your awareness as naturally as the morning light. The Inca Empire, at its height in the 15th century, managed to feed millions of people across some of the harshest terrain on Earth, largely thanks to these terraces. Without them, farming on these steep slopes would have been nearly impossible. With them, the mountains became gardens. You crouch slightly, brushing your fingers against the soil. It's cool and surprisingly soft, carefully maintained. These terraces aren't just steps, they're microenvironments. Each level can hold different moisture, different temperatures, even slightly different crops. It's like nature, but organized, which, if you've ever tried to organize anything in your own life, you know is no small achievement. A farmer passes nearby, carrying a woven basket slung over their back. They don't stop, but they nod, acknowledging you in that quiet, efficient way of someone who has a full day ahead. You get the sense that lingering isn't really part of the schedule here. You follow at a respectful distance, noticing how their movements are steady, practiced. There's no wasted motion. Even the way they step between stones feels intentional, like a dance learned over years rather than something consciously thought about. Somewhere in the distance, you hear the faint trickle of water. It's subtle, almost easy to miss, but once you notice it, it becomes part of the soundscape, the gentle whisper of irrigation channels threading through the terraces. The Inca were masters of water management, guiding it carefully from mountain streams down through the terraces, ensuring that each level received just enough. Historians still argue whether these irrigation systems were entirely standardized across the empire or adapted uniquely by each local community. But standing here, it feels like both could be true. There's a balance between structure and flexibility, rules, but also intuition. You pause as the farmer ahead kneels beside a patch of plants. Potatoes, most likely. Not the smooth, uniform kind you'd find in a modern grocery store, but knobbly, irregular shapes that seem almost stubborn. The Andes are actually the birthplace of the potato, with thousands of varieties cultivated by the Inca. Imagine trying to choose between them at a supermarket. You'd need a map, a guidebook, and possibly emotional support. A quirky tidbit drifts into your thoughts. Some Andean farmers developed a method called freeze-drying long before it became trendy camping food. They would leave potatoes out overnight to freeze in the cold mountain air, then press out the moisture the next day, creating something called chuno, a lightweight, long-lasting food that could be stored for years. So yes, technically, the Inca were doing meal prep on a level that would make modern influencers quietly jealous. The farmer begins working the soil with a simple tool, loosening it gently around the plants. You notice how careful they are, not digging aggressively, not disrupting more than necessary. Everything here is about balance. Take what you need, but don't upset the system. You shift your weight, feeling the altitude again. Your lungs remind you that you are very much not from here. Breathing takes effort, like your body is politely but firmly reminding you that this environment requires respect. You resist the urge to dramatically flop onto the nearest terrace and declare defeat. Barely. The sun climbs higher now, warming the stone beneath your feet. The terraces stretch endlessly in both directions, wrapping around the mountain like a living staircase. It's easy to forget, in this quiet moment, that this place once formed part of a vast empire. Roads stretching thousands of kilometers, connecting cities, farms, and people across an enormous landscape. But here, in this early hour, it feels small, intimate. Just you, the farmer, the soil, and the slow unfolding of the day. You take another breath, deeper this time, adjusting, just slightly, to the thin air. Not comfortable yet, but closer. The rhythm of the place begins to settle into you, like a heartbeat you're starting to match. And as the morning continues to brighten, you realize something subtle but important. Nothing here is rushed, yet nothing is idle. Every moment has purpose, even the quiet ones. Especially the quiet ones. You step forward again, following the path as it winds gently upward, the terraces guiding you deeper into this world. One careful step at a time. The path rises in a quiet, steady rhythm, and you follow it almost without thinking, your feet adjusting to the uneven stones as if they've decided to cooperate for once. The terraces stretch beside you like a layered puzzle, each step carved into the mountain with a patience that feels almost impossible by modern standards. No shortcuts here. No, we'll fix it later. Just stone, earth, and an understanding that this work is meant to last longer than any single lifetime, including yours, which, given the altitude, is currently feeling negotiable. You place your hand against one of the terrace walls as you climb, the stone cool but beginning to warm under the strengthening sun. These aren't random rocks stacked together. Each stone has been shaped, chosen, fitted with care. No mortar, no glue, just precision. It's the same technique used across the Inca world, from terraces to temples, where stones fit so tightly you couldn't slip a piece of paper between them. Which is impressive because if you've ever tried to assemble flat-pack furniture, you know how easily things can go sideways. A mainstream historical fact settles in as you climb. The Inca didn't use iron tools or the wheel for construction, yet they built an empire of remarkable infrastructure. Roads, bridges, terraces, spanning over 40,000 kilometers. Everything you're walking on right now was shaped with simpler tools and an enormous amount of human effort. No machines humming in the background. Just hands, time, and a very clear sense of purpose. The path narrows slightly, and you adjust your footing, stepping carefully along the edge. Below you, the terraces cascade down in long, green ribbons, broken only by the occasional stone staircase cutting straight through them like a spine. You realize these steps aren't just for convenience, they're essential. Moving up and down these terraces is part of daily life, repeated dozens of times, every single day. Your legs are already filing a quiet complaint. Ahead, a group of farmers moves upward in a slow line, baskets on their backs, their pace steady and unhurried. You notice how they lean slightly forward as they climb, distributing the weight in a way that feels almost instinctive. There's a rhythm to it, step, breath, that you try to mimic. It helps. A little. The terraces themselves begin to reveal more detail as you get closer. Some are planted with maize, the tall stalks catching the morning light, their leaves whispering softly in the breeze. Others hold low, spreading potato plants, their leaves dense and textured. And then there's quinoa, with its delicate, feathery heads, shifting gently like tiny flags. Each terrace has its own personality, its own microclimate. The stone walls absorb heat during the day and release it slowly at night, protecting crops from frost. It's subtle, but it makes all the difference. Farming up here isn't just about planting seeds. It's about negotiating with the mountain itself. Historians still argue whether the terrace system was primarily designed to maximize agricultural output or to stabilize the slopes and prevent erosion. But standing here, it feels like those goals are inseparable. You don't get one without the other. Survival here isn't about choosing priorities. It's about layering them, just like the terraces themselves. You pause at a wider landing, catching your breath and pretending you're just admiring the view, which, to be fair, you are. The valley below stretches out in soft greens and browns, dotted with more terraces, more paths, more signs of quiet human persistence. The sky is now fully awake, a clear, endless blue that feels almost too big. A farmer nearby adjusts the strap of their basket, then continues upward without hesitation. You notice how little they stop. Rest exists, but it's brief, purposeful. There's no lingering for the sake of lingering. The day has a shape, and they're moving through it with practiced ease. You glance back at the wall beside you, noticing something you hadn't seen before. Small gaps at the base, almost like hidden openings. These are drainage channels, allowing excess water to pass through without destabilizing the structure. It's one of those details that's easy to miss but essential to the whole system. Without proper drainage, the terraces would collapse over time. A quirky detail comes to mind. Some researchers believe that certain terrace layouts may have also been used for agricultural experimentation, essentially early research stations where the Inca tested how crops responded to different conditions. So while you're out here trying not to trip over a rock, someone centuries ago might have been running controlled potato trials. Science, but make it mountain. You push yourself up from the wall and continue climbing, your legs slowly finding a rhythm that doesn't feel like immediate betrayal. The path curves gently, leading you higher, where the terraces become narrower, more tightly packed. The air feels even thinner here, each breath a little more deliberate. You try not to think about how far you've climbed, or how far you still might have to go. Instead, you focus on the details. The texture of the stone under your fingers, the sound of wind moving through the crops, the quiet footfalls of the farmers ahead. At one point, you step onto a particularly narrow section, and your foot slips just slightly on a smooth stone. Your heart does a quick, dramatic leap, clearly auditioning for a more exciting lifestyle. You steady yourself, regain your balance, and pretend that didn't happen. No one saw it. The mountain definitely didn't judge you. Probably. As you move higher, the terraces begin to open up again, the path widening into a broader platform. Here, a few farmers have paused, setting down their baskets. One kneels to adjust something in the soil, while another looks out over the valley, their posture relaxed but attentive. You realize that these pauses aren't breaks in the work. They're part of it. Moments to check, to adjust, to observe. Farming here isn't just physical labor. It's constant awareness. The land changes, the weather shifts, and you have to notice. You take a deep breath, filling your lungs as much as the altitude allows. It still feels like you're borrowing oxygen rather than owning it, but you're managing. Barely. The sun now sits higher in the sky, casting shorter shadows across the terraces. The morning has fully arrived, and with it, a quiet sense of momentum. The day is unfolding, step by step, just like the climb. And as you stand there, halfway between where you started and wherever this path leads, you begin to understand something simple but profound. These terraces aren't just a place. They're a process, a way of moving through the world, carefully, deliberately, one step at a time. You shift your weight, adjust your footing, and keep climbing. The climb eases, almost mercifully, and the path opens into a stretch of terraces where the work of the morning is already in full swing. You step onto the packed earth of a wider level, and for a moment, you just stand there, letting your breathing settle into something less dramatic than a whispered cry for help. Around you, the day has properly begun. A farmer kneels a few paces away, carefully loosening soil around a cluster of potato plants. Another moves along a row of maize, checking the leaves with a practiced eye, fingers brushing lightly as if reading a language written in green. You realize quickly this isn't chaotic activity. It's structured, almost rhythmic, like everyone knows exactly what needs to happen without needing to say it out loud. You move closer, crouching near the soil. It's darker here than you expected, rich and slightly damp beneath the surface. The terraces aren't just carved into the mountain. They're layered with different types of earth and gravel to control drainage and fertility. A quiet engineering trick hidden under your feet. A mainstream historical fact settles into place as you watch. The Inca cultivated an astonishing variety of crops, with potatoes alone numbering in the thousands of types. This biodiversity wasn't just for variety, it was insurance. If one crop failed, another might survive. It's a strategy that feels both practical and oddly comforting, like keeping multiple snacks in your bag because you don't trust your future self to make good decisions. You reach out and gently touch a potato plant, its leaves slightly waxy, cool in the morning air. These humble plants are the backbone of life here. Not glamorous, not flashy, but reliable. Which, honestly, is more than most of us can say before coffee. Nearby, someone uses a foot plow, simple, wooden, and powered entirely by body weight to turn the soil. You watch as they press it into the ground with one foot, leveraging their weight to break the surface. The slow work, deliberate, and surprisingly graceful. There's no rush, no aggressive digging, just steady pressure and patience. You try to imagine doing this for hours. Your legs, already mildly offended by the climb, seem to protest the idea. Quietly, for now, a woman walks past carrying a bundle of quinoa stalks, their delicate seed heads catching the sunlight. You notice how she pauses briefly to speak with another farmer. Just a few words, a shared glance, and then continues on. Communication here is minimal but meaningful. No long meetings, no emails, just direct human interaction. Revolutionary, really. You shift your attention to a nearby patch of quinoa. The plants are tall but soft-looking, their colors ranging from pale green to hints of red and gold. They sway gently in the breeze, almost like they're breathing. Quinoa, you remember, is incredibly nutritious, packed with protein and capable of growing in harsh conditions. Perfect match for this environment. Historians still argue whether quinoa or potatoes were the more central staple of the Inca diet, but standing here, it feels less like a competition and more like a partnership. Each crop plays its role. No one is trying to outshine the other. This teamwork, agricultural addition. A faint sound catches your attention. The soft clink of tools, the rustle of leaves, the occasional murmur of voices. It's a quiet kind of productivity, nothing like the loud, mechanical noise of modern farming. No engines, no buzzing machines. Just people, plants, and the steady passage of time. You notice a small pile of oddly shaped potatoes set aside on a flat stone. They're different from the others, smaller, more irregular. Not discarded, just separated. You wonder briefly if they have a specific use or if they're simply waiting their turn. A quirky tidbit drifts into your thoughts. Some Andean communities believed that particularly unusual or misshapen potatoes had special qualities, sometimes even associating them with spirits or luck. So while you might see an oddly shaped potato and think, weird, someone here might see it and think, this one has a story. You stand and stretch slightly, your back reminding you that crouching gracefully is not one of your core skills. A farmer nearby glances at you briefly, then returns to their work, clearly unimpressed by your attempt at blending in. Fair enough. You take a few steps along the terrace, watching as another group begins planting. Small holes are made in the soil, seeds placed carefully, then covered with just enough earth. It's repetitive, yes, but there's a certain calm to it. Each motion follows the last, predictable and steady. You find yourself drawn into the rhythm. Step, bend, place, cover. Even just watching it has a soothing effect, like your mind is syncing with the pattern. It's the kind of work that doesn't demand constant decision-making. You just do. And maybe that's part of the appeal. No endless choices, no overthinking. Just a clear task and the quiet satisfaction of completing it, again and again. A breeze picks up, moving across the terraces in a soft wave. The maize leaves rustle, the quinoa sways, and for a moment, The entire landscape seems to breathe together. You feel it too, that gentle shift in the air, brushing against your skin. You take a deeper breath, and this time it comes a little easier. Not perfect, but better. Your body is adjusting, slowly but surely. The mountain hasn't fully accepted you, but it's at least considering your application. You glance around at the farmers, each one absorbed in their task, and realize something subtle. No one is rushing, but everything is getting done. It's a pace that feels almost foreign, especially if you're used to measuring productivity and speed. Here, it's measured in consistency. You walk a little farther, passing a row where young plants are just beginning to break through the soil. Tiny green shoots pushing upward, fragile but determined. It's a quiet reminder that everything here starts small. Every harvest, every meal, every season begins like this. You pause, watching those small shoots, and for a moment the scale of it all shifts. The vast terraces, the mountains, the sky, they're all built on these tiny beginnings. And as the morning continues, the work flows on around you. Steady, grounded, and quietly essential. No grand gestures, no dramatic moments, just the simple, persistent act of tending the land. You take one last look at the rows of crops, then step forward again, drawn deeper into the rhythm of this place, where every movement, no matter how small, matters. The soft murmur you noticed earlier, the almost hidden sound threading through the terraces, begins to pull your attention more strongly now. It's not loud, not demanding, but once you tune into it, it becomes impossible to ignore. Water, always moving, always finding a path. You follow the sound along the edge of the terrace, stepping carefully until you spot it. A narrow channel cut neatly into the earth and lined with stone. Clear water slips through it, steady and calm, catching glints of sunlight as it goes. It doesn't rush. It doesn't hesitate. It simply flows, as if it has somewhere important to be but isn't in any particular hurry to get there. A mood, honestly. You crouch beside the channel, watching how the water curves gently around small bends, never spilling over, never cutting too deep. This isn't accidental. Every angle, every slope has been calculated, if not with modern math, then with something just as effective: observation, repetition, and patience across generations. A mainstream historical fact settles into place. The Inca developed highly sophisticated irrigation systems that carried water from mountain springs and streams across long distances, distributing it evenly through terraces like these. Without this control, farming at such altitudes would have been unreliable at best. Water here isn't just helpful, it's everything. You dip your fingers lightly into the channel. The water is cold enough to make you pull back instinctively, fresh from higher elevations. Feels clean in a way that's hard to describe, untouched, almost. You resist the urge to splash your face dramatically, mostly because you're trying to maintain some dignity in front of people who have clearly mastered this environment. Nearby, a farmer adjusts a small stone within the channel, subtly altering the flow. The movement is precise, almost delicate. Just a slight shift, and the water begins to favor one side over the other, redirecting itself into a neighboring terrace. It's like watching someone tune an instrument you didn't realize the land could be. You follow the redirected stream as it spills gently into the soil, darkening it almost instantly. The plants nearby seem to respond, their leaves catching the moisture, their roots quietly receiving what they need. No flooding, no waste, just enough. Historians still argue whether the Inca had centralized control over water distribution or if local communities managed their own systems independently. But standing here, it feels deeply personal. The way this farmer adjusts the flow, it's not distant governance. It's hands-on care, moment by moment. You stand and walk alongside the channel as it continues its path, occasionally splitting into smaller streams that branch off like veins. Each division is intentional, feeding different sections, different crops. It's a network, but not the kind you scroll through absent-mindedly. This one actually sustains life. A faint chuckle escapes you as a thought crosses your mind. Somewhere in your own world, you've probably struggled to get water pressure right in a shower. Meanwhile, here, centuries ago, people were fine-tuning entire irrigation systems across mountainsides. Perspective is humbling. You step over a narrow crossing where flat stones have been placed to allow passage without disturbing the flow. It's such a small detail, but it speaks volumes. Everything here is designed with both function and movement in mind. The terraces aren't just for growing, they're for living, walking, working. A quirky tidbit bubbles up. Some researchers believe that certain Inca water channels were also designed to create specific sounds as the water moved through them. Soft, musical tones that might have had ceremonial or aesthetic significance. So while you're standing here thinking, nice, efficient irrigation, someone else might have been thinking, ah yes, the soothing melody of mountain hydration. You pause again, listening more closely now. The water does have a rhythm, a gentle, continuous note that blends with the rustle of leaves and the distant footfalls of farmers. It's not quite music, but it's not just noise either. Something in between. You follow the channel as it curves around a terrace corner, where the ground slopes slightly more steeply. Here, the stones are arranged more tightly, reinforcing the structure. You notice how the water slows just enough to avoid eroding the soil, guided by subtle changes in the channel's shape. It's all about control. Not forcing the water, not stopping it, just guiding it. Working with it rather than against it. Which, if you think about it, is a pretty solid life philosophy. You make a mental note to remember that the next time you try to brute force your way through a problem and end up making it worse. A farmer nearby kneels to check the moisture level in the soil, pressing their fingers into it, then nodding slightly to themselves. No instruments, no digital readouts, just experience. You get the sense that they can read the land the way you might read a familiar book. Subtle cues, small changes, all adding up to understanding. You take a slow breath, letting the sound of the water settle into you. It's calming in a way that feels almost physical, like it's smoothing out the edges of your thoughts. The earlier strain of the climb, the effort of adjusting to the altitude, it all seems to fade slightly into the background. The sun continues to rise, warming the terraces, and the water glints more brightly now, little flashes of light dancing along its surface. You notice how the flow never stops. Even as farmers move around it, step over it, adjust it, it keeps going. Constant, reliable. You realize that this system doesn't just support the crops. It supports the rhythm of the day. Water determines when and where work happens, how the terraces are tended, how the plants grow. It's woven into everything. You walk a little farther, watching as one channel merges back into a larger stream, the separate flows rejoining seamlessly. There's something satisfying about it, that quiet return to unity after branching out. And as you stand there, listening to the soft, steady movement of water through stone and soil, you begin to feel more in sync with this place. The pace, the balance, the quiet precision, it's no longer something you're just observing. You're starting to move with it. You take one last look at the channel, then turn, following the path as it leads you onward, deeper into the terraces, where the work and the day continue to unfold. The path bends gently away from the water, and almost without noticing, you find your hands drifting closer to the soil again, as if the land itself is quietly inviting you to take part instead of just observing. Up ahead, a farmer presses their foot into a wooden plow, leaning forward with a controlled, practiced motion. The tool bites into the earth, turning it just enough, not too deep, not too forceful. It's a slow rhythm, intentional. You get the feeling that if you rushed this, the mountain would notice, and not in a friendly way. You hesitate for a moment, then step closer, watching carefully. The farmer shifts their weight again, pressing the tool down, levering the soil open. There's a subtle coordination between balance, pressure, and timing. It looks simple. It absolutely is not. You place your own foot against the ground, testing the firmness of the soil. It gives slightly, but not much. This earth has structure. It's been built up, maintained, protected over seasons, maybe generations. You crouch and run your fingers through the top layer, noticing small stones mixed in, helping with drainage. Nothing here is random. A mainstream historical fact quietly settles in. Andean farmers relied heavily on tools like the chaquetacla, a traditional foot plow that allowed them to cultivate steep, rocky terrain without animals or machinery. It's labor-intensive, yes, but it's also incredibly precise. giving them control over soil depth and structure in ways large equipment never could. You watch the farmer again, then, against your better judgment, try to mimic the motion. You press your foot down, lean forward, and attempt to drive the tool into the soil. Resist firmly. Your leg wobbles slightly, your balance wavers, and for a brief moment, it looks like you might invent a brand new form of interpretive falling. You recover. Mostly, the farmer glances at you, expression unreadable, then returns to their work. You choose to interpret that as polite encouragement. Trying again, you adjust your stance. More forward lean, more controlled pressure, and this time the tool sinks just a little. Not much, but enough to feel like a victory. A small one. A very, very small one. You step back, deciding that perhaps observation is your strongest contribution to this agricultural system. Around you, the work continues in steady patterns. Some farmers turn soil, others plant, others move along rows checking growth. No one seems idle, but no one looks rushed either. It's a balance that feels almost impossible to replicate anywhere else. Historians still argue whether this labor was organized strictly through state control or through community-based systems like the elu, a form of collective social structure where families worked shared land, but standing here, it feels deeply communal. There's no sense of isolation. Everyone's work connects. You move along the terrace, noticing how the soil varies slightly from one section to another. Some areas darker and more compact, others looser, lighter. Micro-adjustments made over time. It's like each patch of land has been fine-tuned, not just cultivated. A breeze drifts across the terraces, lifting the edges of your clothing and carrying the faint scent of earth and greenery. The subtle grounding. You pause, letting it settle over you. A quirky detail surfaces. Some Andean farmers used to test soil readiness by taste, yes, actually tasting it, to gauge mineral content and moisture balance. Which, if you're tempted to try, just remember, you're a visitor here. Maybe let the professionals handle the soil snacking. You straighten, stretching your back again, and notice a group working in quiet coordination nearby. One loosens soil, another follows placing seeds. A third covers them lightly. It's like a moving system, each person part of a chain that flows across the terrace. You watch for a while, drawn into the repetition. There's something calming about it, the predictability, the steady pace. No sudden changes, no urgent interruptions. Just one action leading into the next. You try to match your breathing to the rhythm. Step, bend, press, lift. It works in a quiet way. Your body begins to feel less like it's fighting the altitude and more like it's negotiating with it. Cautious truce. The sun now sits higher, warming the soil enough that you can feel a gentle heat rising from it. The terraces seem more alive in this light, colors deepening, shadows softening. You kneel again, this time just to feel the ground beneath your hands. There's a firmness to it, but also a subtle give, like it's holding together while still allowing for growth. You think about how much effort goes into maintaining that balance. Too compact and roots struggle. Too loose and water drains too quickly. Everything here is about that middle ground. You glance up as someone walks past carrying a bundle of tools. They move with quiet efficiency, steps measured, posture steady. No wasted motion. You notice that again, how little energy is spent on anything unnecessary. You consider how different this is from your usual pace of life. The constant movement, the endless decisions, the feeling of always needing to do more, faster. Here, the pace is slower, but somehow nothing is lacking. You brush the soil from your hands and stand, taking in the terraces around you once more. The patterns of work, the flow of movement, the quiet coordination, it all blends into something larger than any individual task. And you realize something simple but oddly comforting. Survival here isn't about pushing harder. It's about moving steadily, staying in rhythm, and trusting the process. Even if that process occasionally makes you question your leg strength. You take a slow breath, feeling the air fill your lungs a little more easily now. Not effortless, but manageable. You've adjusted at least a little. And as you step forward again, leaving the patch of freshly turned soil behind, you carry that rhythm with you. Quiet, steady, and just persistent enough to keep you going. The steady rhythm of work gradually softens as the sun climbs higher, and without any announcement, without a bell or a shouted signal, the energy of the terraces begins to shift. Tools are set down, backs straighten, and movement slows into something more relaxed. It's subtle, almost like the land itself is exhaling. You follow along as a small group gathers near a flatter section of terrace, where the ground has been cleared just enough to sit. There's no formal seating, no neatly arranged benches, just earth, warm now from the sun, and a few woven cloths spread out with quiet practicality. This is where midday happens. You lower yourself onto the ground, grateful for the pause, your legs quietly celebrating the decision. Around you, baskets are opened, and simple foods are brought out with no ceremony but plenty of familiarity. This isn't a feast. It's something better, something consistent. A woman unwraps a cloth bundle, revealing boiled potatoes in a range of colors you didn't even realize potatoes could have. Deep purples, soft yellows, earthy browns. Another passes around small portions of maize, some roasted, some ground into a coarse mash. Quinoa appears too, lightly prepared, its tiny grains catching the light. A mainstream historical fact settles in naturally. The Inca diet relied heavily on staples like potatoes, maize, and quinoa, providing the necessary energy to sustain physically demanding lives at high altitude. It wasn't extravagant, but it was effective, nutritionally balanced in ways that modern diets sometimes struggle to replicate, despite all our apps and advice columns. You accept a potato offered to you, its skin slightly rough, still warm. There's no seasoning, no elaborate preparation. Just the potato. You take a bite, and it's surprisingly satisfying. Earthy, dense, quietly flavorful. Hunger, it turns out, is an excellent chef. You glance around as others begin eating, conversations low and unhurried. There's laughter too, soft, occasional bursts that ripple through the group and fade just as easily. It's not loud, not overwhelming, just enough to remind you that even in a life of steady labor, there's room for lightness. You try a bit of quinoa next, noticing its texture, light but filling. It's easy to see why it became such an important part of life here. Small grains, big impact. A lesson in efficiency, really. Historians still argue whether meals like this were eaten communally every day or varied depending on workload and season. But what you're seeing now feels deeply rooted. Not just about nourishment, but about pause, about connection. You notice how no one rushes through the meal. There's no sense of urgency, no quick bites before getting back to work. Eating is part of the rhythm, not an interruption to it. A breeze drifts across the terrace, cooling the air just enough to make the moment feel even more comfortable. You shift slightly, stretching your legs out in front of you, and for a brief second you consider the possibility of a nap. A dangerous thought, a very tempting one. A farmer nearby leans back on their hands, looking out over the terraces below. You follow their gaze. From here, the landscape unfolds in soft layers. Green steps, winding paths, distant figures moving slowly. It's quiet in a way that feels earned. A quirky tidbit floats into your awareness. In some Andean traditions, certain foods were believed to carry specific energies or connections to the earth, and meals could have subtle symbolic meanings beyond simple nutrition. So while you're thinking, this potato is pretty good, someone else might be thinking, this potato connects me to the mountain. Same bite, very different vibe. You take another bite, considering that. The idea that food isn't just fuel, it's part of a relationship with the land. It's not something you grab on the go. It's something you receive. You notice a small bowl being passed around, containing a thicker, darker paste. You try a small amount, its flavor stronger, slightly bitter, but not unpleasant. You can't quite place it, but it feels purposeful, like it's meant to complement the other foods. Nearby, two farmers exchange a few words, then share a quiet laugh. You don't understand the language, but the tone is universal. It's the kind of laughter that comes easily, without needing explanation. You realize something as you sit there, chewing slowly, watching the group. No one is distracted. There are no devices, no divided attention. Everyone is fully present in this small, simple moment, which, if you think about it, is almost revolutionary. You glance down at your hands, still holding the half-eaten potato. There's a grounding quality to it, the texture, the warmth, the weight. It's real in a way that's hard to ignore. The sun continues its slow climb, now high enough to cast a gentle heat across the terrace. Shadows shorten, colors deepen, and the air carries a soft warmth that feels almost comforting against your skin. You lean back slightly, resting your weight on your hands, and let your gaze drift across the horizon. The mountains rise in the distance, steady and unmoving, watching over everything without needing to interfere. For a moment, time feels different. Not slower exactly, but less fragmented. More continuous. One moment flowing into the next without interruption. You take a final bite, finishing the potato, and brush your hands lightly against your clothing. Around you, others begin to gather their things, wrapping cloths, closing baskets. The pause is ending, but it doesn't feel abrupt. It feels complete. You stand, stretching gently, your body a little more relaxed now, your breathing steady. The work will begin again soon. You can feel it in the subtle shift of movement around you. But for now, there's a lingering sense of calm. And as you take one last look at the simple meal that just sustained you, you realize it wasn't just about the food. It was about the moment it created, a space to rest, to connect, to simply be. You step forward with the others as they begin to move again, carrying that quiet sense of balance with you as the day continues to unfold. The gentle lull of the meal fades almost imperceptibly into motion again, as if rest itself has a natural endpoint here. No alarms, no reluctant sighs, just a quiet return to purpose. You follow along as the group begins moving toward a slightly different part of the terraces, where the land dips and rises in broader, more structured platforms. At first, it looks like just another set of terraces. But as you draw closer, you notice something different. The stonework is thicker here, more enclosed, forming rectangular structures that stand apart from the open planting areas. Their walls are solid, deliberate, and their doorways narrow, designed not for comfort, but for function. Storehouses. You approach one slowly, peering inside. The interior is cool, noticeably cooler than the sunlit terraces outside. The air feels dry, still carefully preserved. This isn't accidental. It's engineered. The placement, the ventilation, the materials, all chosen to create the right conditions for storage. A mainstream historical fact settles into place. The Inca built extensive networks of storehouses, known as calca, to preserve food like maize, potatoes, and dried goods across their empire. These reserves were critical, allowing them to redistribute supplies during times of shortage, famine, or military campaigns. In a world without supermarkets or, frankly, snack drawers, this was the safety net. You step inside one of the structures, your eyes adjusting to the dim light. Along the walls, you can imagine sacks of dried crops once stacked carefully, organized not by convenience, but by necessity. Everything stored with intention, accounted for, protected. The temperature difference is striking. Even on a warm day like this, the interior remains cool. Small ventilation openings near the top of the walls allow air to circulate just enough to prevent moisture buildup. It's passive refrigeration, centuries before electricity even entered the conversation. You run your hand lightly along the stone wall. It's rough but solid, built to last, just like everything else here. There's a quiet reassurance in that. These structures weren't temporary solutions. They were part of a long-term vision. Historians still argue whether the distribution of stored food was centrally controlled by the state or managed more locally within communities. But either way, the existence of these storehouses speaks to a deep understanding of risk. Crops fail, weather shifts, and when they do, preparation is the difference between survival and not. You step back out into the sunlight, blinking slightly as the brightness returns. Nearby, a farmer opens a woven sack, revealing small, pale chunks of something unfamiliar. You lean closer, curious. Chuno, the freeze-dried potato you thought about earlier, this is it in its finished form. Light, dry, almost weightless compared to its original state. You pick one up carefully, turning it over in your fingers. It feels like something that shouldn't exist, like a potato that decided to become a stone. A quirky detail surfaces. The process of making chuno involves leaving potatoes out in the freezing night air, then trampling them the next day to remove moisture before drying them further in the sun. It's part food preservation, part full-body workout. Somewhere between meal prep and an accidental dance routine. You watch as the farmer handles the chuno with care, placing it back into the sack. It may not look like much, but it represents security. Food that can last for years, ready when fresh crops aren't available. You move along the row of storehouses, noticing how they're positioned slightly above the terraces, where airflow is better. It's a small elevation, but it makes a difference. Everything here is about those small differences. You pause at another structure, this one partially open, and see bundles of maize hanging inside, drying slowly. The kernels catch the light in shades of gold and amber, each one a tiny store of energy waiting to be used. You think about the scale of it all. These storehouses weren't just for one family or one village. They were part of a broader system, supporting entire regions. It's logistics, but without spreadsheets. Planning, but without apps. And yet, it worked. You glance out across the terraces, imagining what it must have looked like at the height of the Inca Empire. Storehouses filled, terraces thriving, people moving along the paths with purpose. A system in motion, sustained by preparation as much as by daily labor. A faint breeze moves through the area, slipping through the ventilation gaps and brushing lightly against your skin. Even the air here feels managed, guided. You take a slow breath, noticing again how your body has adjusted. The altitude still makes itself known, but it's no longer overwhelming. You've found a rhythm just like the farmers, just like the terraces, just like the water. Nearby, a farmer secures the entrance to one of the storehouses, tying it closed with a simple but effective knot. There's no lock, no heavy door, just trust, perhaps, or shared understanding. This food isn't owned in the way you might expect. It's part of something larger. You consider that for a moment. The idea that resources are stored not just for individual use, but for collective survival. It's a different way of thinking, one that feels both distant and strangely logical. You step back from the structures, letting your gaze linger on them for a moment longer. They're quiet now, mostly still, but their purpose is constant. They stand ready, whether needed today or months from now. And as you turn to follow the path again, leaving the cool shadows of the storehouses behind, you carry with you a new understanding. Survival here isn't just about what you grow today. It's about what you save for tomorrow. You step forward, rejoining the slow, steady movement of the terraces, where the work continues, always with one eye on the present and one quietly watching the future. You leave the quiet cool of the storehouses behind, stepping back into the open terraces where the sun now feels stronger, more assertive. The air, though still crisp, carries a faint warmth that settles on your skin. And yet, each breath reminds you that warmth doesn't mean abundance. Not up here. Up here, every inhale still feels slightly borrowed, like the mountain is keeping a close eye on how much you take. You walk alongside a narrow path that climbs again, because of course it does, and your legs, which had just begun to forgive you, immediately reconsider their position. The altitude presses in gently but persistently, a quiet weight behind your eyes, a slight tightness in your chest. Nothing dramatic, just enough to remind you that this environment is not designed for comfort. A mainstream historical fact drifts into focus. Much of the Inca Empire existed at elevations well above 2,500 meters, with some settlements reaching over 3,500 meters. At these heights, oxygen levels are significantly lower, making physical labor more demanding for anyone not adapted to it, which explains why your current walking pace feels like a philosophical debate with gravity. Ahead, a farmer continues upward with steady determination, carrying a load that looks unnecessarily heavy. You watch them for a moment, slightly offended on behalf of your own lungs. Their breathing is controlled, even. No visible strain, just a rhythm that seems perfectly tuned to the altitude. You try to match it, slow inhale, steady exhale, but your body has other ideas, occasionally throwing in a slightly dramatic breath just to keep things interesting. The path narrows again as it climbs, hugging the contour of the mountain. You place each step carefully, aware that balance matters more up here. Not just physically, but energetically. Wasting effort isn't an option. Every movement has a cost. You pause briefly, hands resting on your knees in a position that you will absolutely claim is intentional. From here, the terraces stretch out below you, their patterns more pronounced in the midday light. It's beautiful, yes, but also humbling. Every inch of that landscape has been shaped by human effort, carried out in conditions that make your current mild discomfort feel a little exaggerated. A breeze moves through, cooler now, brushing against your face. It helps just enough to make the next few steps feel possible. You straighten and continue, adjusting your pace. Not slower exactly, but more deliberate. You're learning, slowly. Historians still argue whether the remarkable physical endurance of Andean populations is primarily genetic, developed over generations of high-altitude living, or the result of lifelong acclimatization from birth. Standing here, trying not to breathe like you've just sprinted uphill, which, to be fair, you kind of have, it feels like a combination of both. Plus a level of resilience you're still negotiating. You notice how the farmers use the terrain to their advantage, pausing in shaded spots, choosing paths that conserve energy, adjusting their posture depending on the incline. Nothing is wasted. Even rest is strategic. You step into a slightly shaded section beside a stone wall, feeling the temperature drop just enough to be noticeable. The stones, warmed earlier, now radiate a gentle heat, creating a microclimate that feels oddly comforting. You lean your hand against them for a moment, grounding yourself. A quirky detail drifts into your thoughts. Coca leaves were traditionally used by Andean peoples to help cope with altitude, hunger, and fatigue. Chewed slowly, they release mild stimulants that can ease the strain of high elevations. So while you're out here negotiating with oxygen, someone else might be casually chewing leaves and thinking, "This is fine." You consider the idea briefly, then decide that perhaps you'll stick to controlled breathing and mild determination. The path levels out again, opening onto another set of terraces where the work continues, though at a slightly slower pace now. The midday heat, combined with the altitude, encourages efficiency, not haste. You walk past a farmer who pauses to adjust their load, shifting the weight slightly before continuing. You notice how even that small adjustment is done with care, minimizing strain. It's a constant balancing act between effort and conservation, between movement and rest. You take a deeper breath, and for a moment it feels easier. Not effortless, but manageable. Your body is adapting, slowly finding a way to exist in this thinner air without constant protest. You glance up at the sky, impossibly clear, the blue so deep it almost feels unreal. At this altitude, the atmosphere is thinner, scattering less light, making the sky appear darker, more intense. It is beautiful, but also a quiet reminder of just how high you are. A small group moves past you, their footsteps steady, their pace unbroken. You fall in behind them, matching their rhythm as best you can. Step, breath, step, breath. It works. Not perfectly, but enough. You realize that this is how life continues here, not by pushing harder, but by adapting constantly, adjusting pace, conserving energy, working with the environment rather than against it. The terraces ahead shimmer slightly in the sunlight, the heat rising gently from the soil. You feel it too now, a subtle warmth against your skin, balanced by the cool air. It's a strange combination, but one that somehow works. You slow your breathing, focusing on the rhythm again. Inhale, exhale, step, repeat. And as you continue along the path, the earlier strain begins to fade into something quieter, a background awareness rather than a dominant struggle. You're still aware of the altitude, but it no longer defines every moment. You've found a way to move within it, not perfectly, not effortlessly, but steadily. And as the terraces stretch on ahead, you follow one careful step at a time, your body and the mountain slowly, quietly coming to an understanding. The path steadies again, and with it, your breathing finds that familiar, negotiated rhythm. No longer a struggle, just a quiet agreement between you and the altitude. The terraces ahead feel softer somehow, less like a challenge and more like a continuation. And as you move forward, something subtle begins to shift, not in the land, but in the atmosphere. There's a pause in the work. Not a full stop, not like the midday meal, but a moment of intention woven into the routine. A few farmers gather near a small, flat stone set slightly apart from the terraces. It's not large, not ornate, but it carries a sense of significance that's hard to ignore. You slow your steps, approaching quietly. No one calls attention to what's happening, but everyone nearby seems aware of it. A woven pouch is opened, and from it, a small handful of leaves, green, delicate, are carefully placed on the stone. Coca leaves. You recognize them now, remembering their role not just in managing altitude, but in something deeper, something cultural, spiritual. The farmers don't rush this moment. They stand, heads slightly bowed, movements deliberate. A mainstream historical fact settles into place. The Inca held deep spiritual beliefs centered around nature, particularly Pachamama, the Earth Mother, who was honored through offerings and rituals tied closely to agriculture. Farming wasn't just labor. It was a relationship, one that required respect, acknowledgement, and gratitude. You watch as one of the farmers gently arranges the leaves, then adds a small portion of food, perhaps maize or quinoa, beside them. The gesture is simple but meaningful. An offering, a quiet thank you to the land that sustains them. No words are spoken, at least none that you can hear, but the silence itself feels intentional, like the message doesn't need to be voiced to be understood. You stand still, unsure whether to step closer or remain where you are. Instinct tells you to stay back, to observe without intruding. This isn't a performance. It's a moment of connection. Historians still argue whether these daily rituals were consistent across all Inca communities or varied widely depending on local traditions. But what you're witnessing feels deeply personal, not formal, not rigid, just integrated into life. A breeze moves gently across the terraces, lifting the edges of clothing, rustling the leaves. For a brief moment, it feels as though the land itself is responding, subtle, almost imperceptible, but present. You notice how the farmer's posture shifts slightly after the offering. Not dramatically, just a small release, like something has been acknowledged, balanced. Then, just as quietly as it began, the moment passes. Work resumes. Tools are picked up, movements return to their steady rhythm, and the terraces come back to life with the soft sounds of labor. But something lingers, a sense that what you just witnessed isn't separate from the work. It's part of it. A quirky detail surfaces in your thoughts. Some Andean traditions involved reading coca leaves in a way similar to how others might read tea leaves, interpreting their arrangement to gain insight or guidance. So while you might see a small pile of leaves, someone else might see a conversation with the unseen. You take a slow breath, letting that idea settle. The notion that the land isn't just a resource, but a presence. That farming isn't just about producing food, but maintaining a relationship. You step forward again, moving along the terrace, but your pace feels different now. More aware, more attuned to the small details, the way the soil shifts underfoot, the sound of water in the distance, the subtle movements of the plants in the breeze. You pass by a farmer who pauses briefly, placing a hand on the ground before continuing. It's a small gesture, easy to miss, but now you notice it. A touch. Connection. The terraces stretch out ahead, unchanged in their structure, but somehow different in your perception. You're no longer just seeing them as fields or steps carved into a mountain. They're part of a larger system, one that includes not just physical labor, but belief, intention, and respect. You glance back briefly at the small stone where the offering was made. The leaves remain, undisturbed, catching the light. No one returns to them. They're left as they are, part of the landscape now. The sky above remains clear, the sun steady, the air thin but manageable. Everything continues as before, and yet not quite the same. You walk alongside a row of maize, the tall stalks casting thin shadows across your path. Their leaves brush lightly against your arm as you pass, a soft, almost reassuring contact. You realize that this balance between work and ritual, between effort and acknowledgement, is what sustains life here. It's not just about what you do, but how you do it. With awareness, with intention. You take another breath, deeper now, feeling the air fill your lungs with less resistance than before. Your body has adapted, yes, but your perspective has shifted too. The terraces continue, the work continues, and you move with it, carrying that quiet moment of connection with you. Not as something separate, but as something woven into every step that follows. You move on from the quiet stone and its offering, the echo of that small ritual settling somewhere in the background of your thoughts. Not loud, not demanding, just present. The terraces stretch ahead again, and with them, the steady rhythm of work resumes. But now, your attention begins to shift toward something you hadn't fully noticed before. Not the crops, not the tools, the people behind it all, especially the women. First, it's subtle. A woman kneels near a low stone wall, grinding maize with a smooth, practiced motion, her hands moving in a steady back-and-forth rhythm that feels almost hypnotic. Nearby, another carefully sorts potatoes, separating them by size and type with quick, precise decisions. There's no hesitation, no second-guessing, just knowing. You slow your pace, watching more closely now. The work here isn't divided in obvious ways, but patterns begin to emerge. Women move between tasks fluidly: fields, food preparation, textiles, coordination. It's not confined to one space. It's woven through everything. A mainstream historical fact settles gently into place. In Inca society, labor was often organized along complementary gender roles, where men and women contributed in different but equally essential ways. Women were deeply involved in agriculture, food preparation, weaving, and maintaining the household economy, though household here extends far beyond what you might imagine. You pass a woman carrying a bundle of harvested plants, her posture steady, steps sure even on the uneven ground. There's strength there, but also efficiency. Nothing wasted. Not movement, not time. You notice how she pauses briefly to speak with another woman, exchanging a few words and a small smile before continuing. It's quick, but meaningful. A thread of connection running through the work. Historians still argue whether women in the Inca Empire held formal political power or primarily influenced society through these daily, essential roles. But standing here, it's hard to see their contribution as anything less than foundational. The system doesn't function without them. That much is clear. You move closer to the woman grinding maize, watching the motion more carefully. The tool, a heavy stone, slides over the grain with a soft, repetitive sound. It's not fast, but it's consistent. The maize gradually breaks down into a coarse flour, ready to be used in meals. You imagine doing this for an hour, then two, then every day. Your arms protest on her behalf. She doesn't seem to notice, or rather, she's adapted. The movement is part of her rhythm, just like walking the terraces, just like breathing the thin air. It's not something she has to think about anymore. A quirky tidbit drifts into your thoughts. Inca textiles, often woven by women, were so finely crafted that they were considered more valuable than gold in some contexts. Imagine that, spending hours weaving something so intricate that it outranks literal treasure. Meanwhile, you're still trying to fold a fitted sheet without losing your will to live. You glance at another woman nearby, who is carefully tying a bundle of quinoa stalks with a woven cord. Her fingers move quickly, confidently, looping and securing the knot in one smooth motion. It's a small task, but done with precision. You begin to notice how much of this work happens in the background. Quiet, steady, often overlooked if you're not paying attention. It doesn't demand recognition, but it holds everything together. You walk a little farther and see a group gathered near a shaded section, where food preparation continues. One stirs a pot over a small fire, while another arranges ingredients on a cloth. The movements are coordinated, almost intuitive. You catch a faint aroma, earthy, warm, comforting. Subtle, but it draws you in. Food here isn't elaborate, but it's cared for, prepared with attention. You pause, watching as a woman tastes something from the pot, then adds a small amount of another ingredient. No measuring cups, no written recipe, just experience guiding the process. You realize that knowledge here isn't stored in books or devices. It's carried in hands, in memory, in repetition passed down over time. A breeze moves through the area, lifting strands of hair, rustling clothing. The sun filters through, casting soft light across the scene. It's calm but not still. Always in motion, just gently. You shift your weight, leaning slightly against a stone wall, and let yourself observe without trying to interpret everything. Sometimes just watching is enough. You think about how much of this work might go unnoticed by outsiders. How easy it would be to focus only on the terraces, the engineering, the visible structures. But without this quieter labor, none of it would function. The terraces grow the food, but this sustains the life around it. You straighten again, stepping back into the path as it curves gently forward. The rhythm of the terraces continues, and you move with it, carrying this new awareness with you. Not everything important stands out. Some of it moves quietly, steadily, shaping the world without asking to be seen. And as you walk on, you begin to notice more of those quiet movements, the ones that keep everything else in place. You move on from the shaded cooking area, the soft clatter of stone, and the faint aroma of warm food lingering behind you like a memory that doesn't quite fade. The terraces stretch forward again, but now your attention shifts to a different kind of movement. Lighter, quicker, less measured. Children. At first, you only catch glimpses, small figures darting between rows, a flash of movement behind a stone wall, a quiet laugh carried on the breeze. Then, as you walk a little farther, they become clearer. A group of them trails behind an older farmer, mimicking their steps with varying degrees of success. One tries to balance a small bundle on their back, clearly determined, though the bundle seems to have other plans. You slow your pace, watching as they move. There's no formal instruction happening. No one standing over them explaining what to do. And yet, they're learning. Every step, every gesture, every repeated motion becomes part of their understanding. A mainstream historical fact settles into place. Inca education wasn't structured in the way you might expect. While the elite had formal instruction, most knowledge, especially agricultural skills, was passed down through observation, imitation, and participation from a very young age. You learn by doing, or at least by trying not to drop the bundle in front of everyone. One child crouches near a row of plants, carefully copying the motion of loosening soil with a small tool. Their movements are less precise, a bit uneven, but the intent is there. You can almost see the learning happening in real-time, trial, error, adjustment. Another runs past, slightly too fast, nearly slipping on a smooth stone before catching themselves at the last second. You feel a brief, sympathetic jolt in your chest. The mountain, it seems, doesn't discriminate when it comes to reminding people to watch their step. Historians still argue whether children's roles in agricultural work were primarily practical, contributing labor early, or more about gradual integration into adult responsibilities, but watching them here, it feels like both. They're helping, yes, but they're also absorbing something deeper. A rhythm, a way of moving through the world. You step aside as a small group passes you, their energy noticeably different from the steady pace of the adults. There's curiosity in their movements, a kind of lightness that hasn't yet been shaped into full efficiency. One glances at you briefly, eyes bright, then quickly looks away, as if deciding you're not nearly as interesting as whatever they were doing before. Fair. You continue walking, noticing how the children naturally position themselves within the flow of work, never fully separate, never fully central. They orbit the tasks, stepping in and out, learning the edges before taking on the core. A quirky detail surfaces in your thoughts. Some Andean communities historically used games and playful challenges to teach practical skills, turning tasks like carrying, planting, or sorting into something engaging for younger learners. So while you might think of it as chores, they might experience it as something closer to competitive farming practice, which honestly sounds like a sport that could use better marketing. You watch as one child attempts to carry a small basket, carefully adjusting their grip, concentrating with surprising intensity. It wobbles slightly, then steadies. A small victory. No applause, no announcement. Just a quiet moment of success that folds back into the rhythm of the day. You realize that this is how continuity is built here, not through formal lessons, but through repetition, observation, and gradual responsibility. There's no clear line where learning ends and working begins. They blend together. You walk alongside a terrace where a slightly older child works more independently, placing seeds into small holes with careful precision. Their movements are slower than an adult's, but deliberate, focused. You get the sense that they've done this many times before. The sun continues to hang high in the sky, casting even light across the terraces. The air feels warmer now, though still tempered by the altitude. You take a breath, noticing how it comes more easily than it did earlier. Not effortless, but familiar. You pause briefly, watching the interplay between generations. An older farmer adjusts a tool, and a child nearby mirrors the motion almost immediately. No explanation needed, just observation turned into action. You think about how different this is from learning in your own world. Structured lessons, written instructions, step-by-step guides. Here it's embodied. Knowledge lives in movement, in muscle memory, in shared experience. You shift your weight, leaning lightly against a stone wall, and let the scene settle around you. The quiet sounds of work continue. Tools, footsteps, the occasional laugh, but now layered with the lighter tones of younger voices. There's something reassuring about it. The sense that this way of life isn't fragile, isn't dependent on a single person or moment. It's carried forward, step by step, generation by generation. You straighten again, stepping back onto the path as it curves gently onward. The terraces continue as they always do, but now you see them not just as a place of work, but as a place of learning, of continuity, of small hands slowly becoming steady ones. And as you walk on, you carry that image with you, the quiet passing of knowledge, woven into the rhythm of the land, as natural as the growth of the crops themselves. You leave behind the light footsteps and quiet laughter of the children, and the path carries you onward along the terraces, curving gently around the mountainside. The rhythm of the day continues, steady, grounded, but now something else begins to emerge. Subtle at first, a difference in texture, in color, in what's being carried. You notice it in the bundles. A farmer passes you with a pack that looks slightly different from the others. Tightly wrapped, secured with extra care. Another follows, carrying something that doesn't quite match the crops you've seen growing here. The shape, the color, it's unfamiliar. Trade. You slow your pace, watching more closely now as a small group approaches from a path that branches off from the main terraces. Their clothing carries slight variations. Patterns, colors, small details that hint at different regions. Not dramatically different, but enough to stand out if you're paying attention. A mainstream historical fact settles in. The Inca Empire maintained an extensive network of roads, over 40,000 kilometers, connecting diverse regions across mountains, valleys, and coastlines. Along these routes, goods were transported not by wheeled carts, but by people and pack animals like llamas, moving items across vast distances. You step aside as the group passes, noticing the steady pace they maintain. Not hurried, not slow, just consistent. One of them carries a bundle that, when briefly uncovered, reveals something you haven't seen here: dried fish. From the coast, most likely. A long journey to reach this altitude. The idea settles in quietly. What you're seeing here isn't isolated. These terraces, these farmers, they're part of a much larger system, connected by movement, exchange, and trust. You fall into step behind the group for a moment, observing how they move. Their posture is slightly different, adjusted for longer travel. Their steps are efficient, conserving energy over distance rather than terrain alone. Historians still argue whether this trade system functioned primarily through state-controlled redistribution or through more localized exchange between communities, but standing here, it feels like a blend. Structured, yes, but also human. Flexible. You pass by a small gathering where goods are being carefully unpacked. Maize is exchanged for something darker, perhaps beans or a different grain. The movements are calm, deliberate. No haggling, no raised voices. Just an understanding of value that doesn't need to be loudly negotiated. A quirky detail drifts into your thoughts. The Inca didn't use currency in the way you might expect. No coins, no bills. Instead, value was often measured through labor, goods, and reciprocity. So while you might be used to checking prices, here it's more like, I helped you last season, you help me this one. A system that's either beautifully simple or mildly stressful, depending on how good your memory is. You watch as a bundle of something bright, chili peppers, perhaps, is revealed, their color vivid against the more muted tones of the terraces. They must have come from lower, warmer regions. A small burst of variety in an otherwise consistent landscape. You take a slow breath, letting the scene settle. The movement of goods, the quiet exchanges, the subtle blending of regions. It all adds another layer to what you've been experiencing. These terraces don't just produce, they connect. You walk a little farther, noticing how the paths widen slightly near these exchange points, allowing for easier movement. Another small detail, another quiet piece of design that supports the larger system. A llama stands nearby, calmly chewing, completely unbothered by the activity around it. You pause, watching it for a moment. Its expression is unreadable, judging perhaps, or just deeply uninterested. Hard to tell. You consider approaching it, then decide against it. The last thing you need is to be outperformed socially by a llama. You continue along the path, passing more signs of exchange. Bundles being sorted, items redistributed, small groups forming and dissolving as goods move from one set of hands to another. There's no rush, no urgency. And yet, everything flows. Items arrive, are shared, are carried onward. The system breathes, expanding and contracting with the movement of people. You realize that this network isn't just about survival, it's about resilience. If one region struggles, another can support it. If crops fail here, something from elsewhere can fill the gap. You think back to the storehouses you saw earlier, the preserved foods, the careful planning. This movement is the other half of that equation. Preparation and connection. You step onto a slightly higher terrace, looking out over the paths below. From here, you can see the lines more clearly, the routes people take, the way they intersect, diverge, and reconnect. It's like watching a living map. The sun begins to shift slightly in the sky, its angle softening just a touch. The light changes with it, casting longer shadows across the terraces. You take another breath, feeling the air fill your lungs with a familiarity that would have seemed impossible earlier. You've adapted, not completely, but enough. And as you stand there, watching the quiet movement of goods and people across the mountain, you understand something that wasn't obvious at first. This place isn't remote. It's connected in ways that don't rely on speed or technology, but on consistency, trust, and the simple act of showing up, again and again. You turn back to the path, following it as it leads you onward, deeper into the terraces, where the day continues to unfold. One exchange, one step, one quiet connection at a time. The path carries you onward, and as the day leans gently past its peak, something in the air begins to shift again. The subtle at first, barely noticeable, but the farmers seem to sense it before you do. Movements change slightly. Glances lift more often toward the sky. The rhythm remains steady, but there's an added layer now. Awareness. You follow their gaze upward. The sky, which had been a clear, endless blue, now holds the faintest trace of change. Thin clouds drifting in, almost hesitant. They don't look threatening, not yet. But here, at this altitude, even small changes matter. You take a breath, and the air feels just a touch cooler than before. A mainstream historical fact settles quietly into your thoughts. Farming in the Andes has always been shaped by unpredictable weather. Sudden frosts, intense sun, shifting winds. The Inca developed resilient agricultural systems, but even they couldn't fully control the elements. Adaptation wasn't optional. It was constant. You walk along the terrace, noticing how the farmers begin making small adjustments. A bundle is secured more tightly. A row of crops is checked again just to be sure. There's no panic, no urgency, just preparation. Historians still argue whether the Inca had accurate methods for predicting weather patterns or relied more on observation and experience passed down through generations. But watching this unfold, it feels instinctive. A quiet reading of the land and sky. A breeze moves through, stronger now, brushing against your face with a cooler edge. It lifts the leaves of the maize, causing them to rustle more sharply than before. The sound is different, less gentle, more insistent. You pull your arms in slightly, feeling the shift in temperature. It's not cold exactly, but it's heading in that direction. Nearby, a farmer begins covering a section of young plants with a light layer of material, perhaps straw or woven fibers, adding a small buffer against the potential drop in temperature. It's a simple action, but it speaks to a deeper understanding. Protect what you can while you can. You step closer, watching the careful placement. Nothing is rushed, but nothing is delayed either. Timing matters. A quirky detail drifts into your awareness. Some Andean farmers historically used natural indicators, like the behavior of animals or the appearance of certain stars, to anticipate weather changes. So while you might check an app, they might look at a llama and think, that's a concerned chew. You glance briefly at the nearby llama. It continues chewing, expression unchanged. Not helpful. The light begins to soften as clouds drift further across the sun, casting a muted tone over the terraces. Shadows blur, colors deepen, and the entire landscape takes on a quieter, more subdued feel. You feel it too, the subtle shift in mood. Not dramatic, not alarming. Just a reminder that this environment is always in motion. You continue along the path, noticing how the work adapts. Some tasks pause, others continue. Priorities shift without needing to be announced. It's a fluid response, shaped by experience rather than instruction. You take a deeper breath, and the air feels slightly heavier now, not in density but in sensation. Cooler, sharper. A farmer passes you, carrying a bundle more quickly than before. Not rushing, but purposeful. You match their pace for a moment, feeling the change ripple through the movement around you. Historians still argue whether climate variability played a significant role in the eventual challenges faced by the Inca Empire, but standing here, it's easy to see how even small shifts could have large effects over time. A single frost at the wrong moment could mean the difference between abundance and scarcity. You pause beside a row of quinoa, watching as the delicate heads sway more noticeably in the wind. They seem resilient but also fragile in their own way, built to endure, but not invincible. You run your fingers lightly along the edge of a leaf, feeling its texture, its coolness. Life here is balanced on a fine edge between growth and loss, between stability and change. The breeze picks up again, carrying with it a faint chill that settles into your clothing. You adjust slightly, pulling your arms closer, grounding yourself. Around you, the terraces remain steady, unchanged in structure, but the energy has shifted. There's a quiet readiness now, a sense that everyone is paying closer attention. You look out across the landscape, watching the clouds move slowly overhead, their shadows drifting across the terraces like passing thoughts. Nothing dramatic, nothing immediate, but enough. You take another breath, steadying yourself, feeling the rhythm again. Slightly altered, but still present. The day continues, but with a new layer of awareness woven into it. And as you step forward, following the path as it curves gently onward, you carry that awareness with you. The understanding that here, survival isn't just about what you do when everything goes right. It's about how you respond when things begin to change. Quietly, steadily, one small adjustment at a time. The breeze doesn't disappear, but it softens again, as if the mountain has decided it has made its point for now. The clouds drift on, thinning just enough to let the sun return in a gentler form, less harsh, more forgiving. And with that subtle shift, the terraces seem to relax once more, settling into the slower rhythm of late afternoon. You continue along the path, noticing how the light has changed. It stretches longer now, sliding across the stone walls and catching the edges of the crops in warm, golden tones. Shadows lengthen, softening the sharp lines of the terraces into something more fluid, more dreamlike. The work hasn't stopped, but it's winding down. Farmers begin gathering tools, stacking them neatly, brushing soil from their hands and clothing. Movements are still deliberate, still efficient, but there's a quiet sense of completion in the air. Not everything is finished, of course. It never is, but enough has been done for today. You follow as a few of them move toward a central area where a small fire has been prepared. It's already burning low, the flames steady, the smoke rising in thin, wavering lines that drift upward and disappear into the cooling air. You lower yourself onto a nearby stone, grateful for the chance to rest again. Your legs, which have carried you across terraces and through thin air all day, finally begin to loosen their quiet complaints. They've earned it. A mainstream historical fact settles in gently. Evenings in Andean farming communities often centered around shared spaces, places to prepare food, exchange stories, and reinforce social bonds after a day of labor. These moments weren't separate from survival, they were part of it, maintaining the cohesion that made everything else possible. You watch as food is prepared again, simpler this time, almost instinctive. Ingredients are brought together without fuss, hands moving with the ease of repetition. The fire crackles softly, its warmth a welcome contrast to the cooling air. Someone places a pot near the flames, and soon, that familiar earthy aroma begins to rise again. Potatoes, perhaps, or a simple stew. Nothing extravagant, just enough. You lean back slightly, letting the warmth reach you, feeling it settle into your skin. The altitude still lingers in your chest, but it no longer feels like a challenge. More like a quiet companion you've learned to live with. Nearby, voices begin to rise. Not loud, not overwhelming, but fuller than before. Conversations stretch a little longer now. Laughter comes more easily. The work is done, or at least paused, and with that comes a different kind of energy. Historians still argue whether storytelling played a formal role in preserving Inca history, given the absence of a written language, but it's widely believed that oral traditions, stories, songs, shared memories, were essential in passing knowledge across generations. Sitting here, it feels natural. Of course, they would tell stories. A farmer begins speaking, their voice calm, steady, drawing the attention of those nearby. You don't understand the words, but the rhythm is clear, measured, intentional. Others listen, some nodding, some smiling faintly, as if the story is familiar. You find yourself leaning in slightly, drawn not by the content, but by the tone. It's soothing in its own way, like a melody without lyrics you recognize. A quirky detail drifts into your thoughts. The Inca used quipu, knotted cords, to record information, possibly even stories or events, though exactly how complex these records were is still debated. Imagine telling a story not just with words, but with knots. Meanwhile, you're still trying to remember where you left your keys. The fire crackles again, sending a small burst of sparks upward before they fade into the air. The light flickers across faces, across stone, across the edges of the terraces. Everything feels softer now, less defined. You take a slow breath, noticing how the air has cooled further. The warmth of the fire becomes more noticeable, more welcome. You shift slightly closer, letting it reach your hands. The sky above begins to deepen, the blue slowly giving way to softer shades as evening approaches. The mountains in the distance darken, their outlines becoming more pronounced against the fading light. You glance around at the group, noticing how the day's effort has settled into a kind of quiet satisfaction. No one is celebrating exactly, but there's a sense of completion, of having done what needed to be done. A bowl is passed to you, filled with a simple portion of food. You accept it, nodding slightly, and take a small bite. It's warm, comforting, familiar now in a way it wasn't earlier. You realize that this quiet gathering, this shared meal, this moment by the fire, is as essential as the work itself. It's where the day is processed, where connections are reinforced, where the rhythm resets. You lean back again, letting the warmth, the voices, the fading light all settle around you. The terraces, so active and structured during the day, now feel almost at rest. And as the conversation continues, as the fire burns steadily, you begin to feel that same sense of winding down, of letting go of the effort, just for a while. The mountain doesn't sleep, not really, but it allows you to. You take another slow breath, deeper now, and let your gaze drift toward the horizon, where the last light of day lingers softly before slipping away. The last light of day thins gently across the terraces, slipping between stone walls and settling into the folds of the mountain as if it's finding a place to rest. You sit quietly, the warmth of the fire fading into a soft glow, and notice how the world around you begins to slow. Not abruptly, not all at once, but in layers. Voices soften first. The conversations that once carried easily now drift into shorter exchanges, then into quiet murmurs, then into something closer to silence. The fire crackles less frequently, its energy settling into embers that pulse with a steady, reddish warmth. You take a slow breath, and the air feels cooler now, crisper, cleaner. The altitude is still there, of course, but it no longer presses against you. It simply exists like the mountains themselves. You glance upward. The sky has deepened into a rich, endless dark, scattered with stars that seem closer than they should be. At this height, with so little in the way, the night reveals itself fully. No haze, no glow from distant cities, just clarity. A mainstream historical fact settles gently into your thoughts. The Inca held a deep connection to the night sky, recognizing constellations not only in the stars, but in the dark spaces between them, shapes formed by absence rather than light. These dark constellations guided agricultural cycles and held cultural meaning woven into daily life. You try to follow the shapes, tracing patterns between the stars and the spaces around them. It's not easy, not at first, but the longer you look, the more the sky seems to open, revealing layers you hadn't noticed. Beside you, someone shifts slightly, adjusting their position near the fire. No one speaks. There's no need to fill the silence. It's comfortable now, like a shared understanding that the day has reached its natural end. Historians still argue whether these nightly moments, these quiet observations of the sky, were deeply ritualized or simply part of everyday life. But sitting here, it feels effortless. Not a ceremony, just attention. A faint breeze moves through, softer than before, brushing lightly against your skin. It carries with it the scent of earth cooling after a long day, of stone releasing its stored warmth, of something calm and steady. You let your shoulders relax, feeling the weight of the day settle, not heavily, but completely. The walking, the climbing, the watching, the learning. It all gathers into a quiet sense of presence. A quirky detail drifts into your thoughts. Some Andean traditions saw the Milky Way as a celestial river, reflecting the rivers and waterways on Earth, a mirror between sky and land. So while you might look up and see stars, someone else might see flowing water above them. It's a perspective that makes the night feel alive. You follow that idea for a moment, letting your gaze drift along the faint band of light stretching across the sky. It does resemble a river in a way, soft, continuous, moving without movement. The embers beside you glow steadily, their light flickering just enough to remind you they're still there. You shift slightly closer, not out of necessity, but out of habit. The warmth is gentle now, subtle. Around you, the terraces fade into shadow, their sharp lines softened by darkness. The structure is still there, you know it is, but it no longer demands your attention. It simply holds the space, quietly. You take another slow breath, and this time it feels effortless. The air moves in and out without resistance, as if your body has finally accepted where it is. Your thoughts begin to slow as well, following the rhythm of your breathing. Inhale, exhale, pause. The mountain doesn't ask anything more of you tonight. It doesn't need you to climb or carry or learn. It just allows you to be. You let your gaze soften, no longer focusing on any one point. The stars blur slightly, the edges of the terraces dissolve into the dark, and the world becomes less about detail and more about feeling. Calm, still, steady. You remember the terraces in the morning, the cold stone, the first light, the quiet beginning. And now, here at the end, everything feels complete. Not finished, but whole. The rhythm continues, even as you rest. Somewhere in the distance, you hear a faint sound, perhaps water still moving through its channels, or the wind passing gently across the slopes. It blends into the silence, becoming part of it. You let your eyes close, just for a moment. And in that moment, the mountain holds you, not tightly, not possessively, but with a quiet presence that asks nothing and offers everything. The breath in your chest rises and falls, slow and even, The warmth at your side lingers, soft and steady. The world around you fades, not into nothing, but into rest. And as the night settles fully over the terraces, wrapping the land in its calm, you drift gently with it, no longer observing, no longer following, just resting. The air grows softer still, the kind of cool that settles gently rather than biting. Your breathing slows, each inhale deeper, each exhale longer, as if the mountain itself is guiding the rhythm now. There is no need to think about the terraces anymore, no need to picture each stone or path. They remain steady and patient, whether you see them or not. The stars above continue their quiet presence, unmoving yet somehow flowing, like that river of light stretching across the sky. You don't need to trace its shape anymore. It simply exists, just as you do in this moment, without effort, without expectation. The warmth beside you fades gradually, not disappearing, just softening into something distant and comforting. The sounds of the night, so subtle you almost miss them, blend into a gentle hush that fills the space without overwhelming it. Your body feels lighter now, as if the weight of the day has fully slipped away. The climb, the work, the learning, it all settles into something quiet and complete, no longer needing your attention. You rest here, held gently between earth and sky, between breath and stillness. Nothing to do, nowhere to go. Just this calm, steady moment stretching softly into sleep.